Mysterious letters, no signature, no return address. Every week, the same ritual, the sound of the mailman, the envelope on the table, and those words that seemed to come from nowhere. At first, he thought it was just a mistake. But the more he read, the more he realized that each sentence carried a weight, a hidden secret. They were letters that spoke of longing, of interrupted love, of guilt never confessed, as if someone on the other side wrote directly to your soul. He never knew where they came from. He could never find out who sent them. But as the days passed, the weight became inevitable. My heart raced every time I found a new envelope. It was as if those letters were a calling, a whisper of something greater, something that had not yet been revealed. And then, on a night of deep silence, faced with a pile of papers, he made a decision that would change everything. For the first time, instead of just reading, he decided to respond. He led a simple life. No extravagances, nothing that drew attention. He worked in silence, kept to his schedule, and always returned home at the same pace, almost like a human clock. Routine wasn't just a habit, it was his refuge. The house where he lived reflected his soul. Walls marked by time, windows that creaked when opened, and a silence that, to some, might sound like loneliness, but to him it was simply peace. In the center of the room sat a small, worn wooden table, marked by glasses, scratches, forgotten objects, and stains that time had never managed to erase. That table had witnessed years of silence, of quick dinners, of coffees sipped in haste before heading off to work. And it was on this table that something unusual began to happen. At first, it seemed like a mere detail, almost insignificant. A letter, no sender, no signature, just a plain envelope left with the regular mail. He thought it was a mistake, maybe a neighbor, maybe an advertisement. But when he opened no advertisement at all. There were words, carefully written words charged with emotion, as if they were confidences meant for someone very specific, though there was no indication of who had written them, nor to whom they were actually intended. The first letter left him intrigued, the second curiously anxious, but it was the third, the fourth, the fifth that changed everything, because the letters kept arriving, always on the same day of the week, always placed in the same place, always handwritten with the same delicate, firm handwriting. At first, he tried to ignore them. He kept the envelopes in a drawer like someone who treasures meaningless memories, but little by little, he began to wait for them, like someone waiting for a visit, for a connection, for something to break the repetitive silence of the days. And suddenly, the routine that had always served as a refuge was no longer enough. Now there was something more, a small but powerful detail. The anticipation of opening the next envelope. The letters spoke of deep feelings. Some described distant memories, as if from a lost childhood. Others carried hidden pain, almost like confessions from someone who had never had the courage to speak aloud. There were texts that spoke of love, a love interrupted by fate, interrupted by something that was never explained. And that messed with him, because as he read those words, he felt as if they were written for him, as if in some inexplicable way the sender knew his soul, knew his own hidden pains, the longings he never confessed, the absences he never admitted to feeling. Time passed, and the pile of letters on the table grew. He could no longer keep them in the drawer. He began to leave them there in plain sight, as if they were part of the house's decor. Sometimes when he came home tired from work, he wouldn't eat, wouldn't turn on the television, and would do nothing but sit at that table and reread 1, 2, 3 old letters, trying to decipher an invisible enigma between the lines. The words began to intertwine with his own life. He wondered, is someone really writing to me? Am I the real recipient of these letters? Or is it just a fabricated story that just happened to fall into my hands? The doubt grew every week, but with her, an attachment also grew, a strange, deep attachment, as if those letters were the only true companion he had. And this is where something fascinating happens. It doesn't matter if you've ever received a mysterious letter or not. We all know what it's like to wait. Waiting for a message that never arrives. Waiting for a call that time insists on postponing. Waiting for someone who seems too far away. And those letters became exactly that for him. Hope disguised as paper. The sound of the mailman was no longer common. Now it was a moment of anticipation. The opening of the envelope, an almost sacred ritual. Each word read, a flame lit amid darkness of the days. The simple life, which was once just routine, was now intertwined with mystery. And the more he tried to understand, the more trapped he became in that web of words. Until one day, when he opened one of the envelopes, he found something different. They weren't just words. It was a small, fragile object, carefully kept inside the letter. And in that instant, he knew this was no longer just a coincidence. The letters had a purpose, and he was about to find out what it was. The letters were written with words full of emotion, profound, almost poetic phrases, but never accompanied by a signature, never with a clear clue as to who was behind them. Some spoke of longing, a longing so intense that it seemed to scream through the lines as if someone were writing from within an immense void. Others spoke of guilt, regrets that time could not erase, secrets kept for decades, open wounds that never healed. And there were those who spoke of love, not simple, everyday love, but a love interrupted, broken by fate, a love that seemed to have been unfairly stolen, as if the universe had taken it upon itself to separate two souls born to find each other. He read and reread, and the more he read, the more he had the strange feeling that those words had been written for him. It wasn't just coincidence. There were sentences that described feelings he himself had experienced, pains he kept silent, memories he'd never shared with anyone. It was as if someone knew, too, much, as if someone somewhere had access to what was inside his heart. The nights became long. He no longer slept as he used to. The routine that had once been his refuge had now become torment. As soon as the sun set, he would sit at his desk, open his old letters, and spend hours rereading each one, word by word, trying to find hidden clues, a detail, a sign, anything that would reveal who was behind the enigmatic correspondence. The silence of the early morning seemed to amplify every. There were nights when he thought he heard footsteps outside, as if someone had just left a new letter. Other times he swore he recognized a soft scent on the paper, as if it had been wrapped in a woman's hands. But whenever he tried to discover its origin, he came up empty. No clues, no signatures, nothing. The obsession grew. He began to distance himself from friends, neglecting ordinary conversations, and even at work, his concentration was no longer the same. His thoughts were constantly on the letters, What had once been a mystery had now become a constant, almost suffocating presence. Until one rainy afternoon, something different happened. He arrived home, picked up the day's envelope, and upon opening it, realized it wasn't just words. Inside the carefully folded paper was something else, an old photograph. The heart raced. It was a photo of a woman he had never seen before. Or at least he thought he had never seen. Her features were delicate, her gaze deep, and there was a mixture of melancholy and tenderness in her smile. It was a faded image, aged by time, as if it had been kept for decades in a forgotten drawer. He was paralyzed. For long minutes, he couldn't take his eyes off that photograph. Who was she? Why had that image reached him? And most importantly, what was her connection to all those letters? An avalanche of questions took over his mind. Could that woman be the mysterious sender? Was it someone he knew but couldn't remember? Or perhaps it was just a piece of an even larger puzzle, an enigma that was only beginning to unfold? And this is where the conflict deepens. Because deep down, we've all been through moments like this. Moments when something seemingly ordinary, a message, a memory, a recollection, awakens unanswered questions within us. Moments when we feel there's something hidden, something that needs to be discovered, but remains in the shadows, fueling our anxiety. He knew that photograph was no ordinary detail. It was a calling, a sign that there was more behind it all. From that moment on, curiosity stopped being just curiosity. It became a necessity. He needed to know who the woman in the photo was. He needed to discover the truth behind the letters. And without realizing it, he took the first step toward a revelation that would change his life forever. Because sometimes it's not what's written that matters most, but what remains hidden between the lines. And he was about to discover within that mystery lay a story much bigger and much more personal than he could ever have imagined. In the silence of that night, something inside him changed. It was as if all the previous letters, all the questions, all the pent-up anxiety had finally led him to that inevitable moment. He sat at the small table, where the stack of yellowed envelopes seemed to watch his every move. The lamp cast a dim light, creating shadows that danced across the worn walls. His heart was pounding hard, almost painfully, as if trying to warn him that there was no going back on this decision. With trembling hands, he picked up a blank sheet of paper. The simple act of holding the pen felt heavy, as if each word he wrote could alter the course of his life. He couldn't tell if he was writing to someone real or to a ghost from the past who had found an ideal recipient in him. Doubt gnawed at him, but at the same time there was a need greater than logic. He needed to respond. He needed to break the cycle of silence, even if it meant diving into an unknown abyss. The words came slowly, almost whispered by the soul itself. He didn't ask for explanations, he didn't make demands. He simply wrote a simple yet weighty sentence. Whoever you are, know that I'm listening. And when he finished, he felt a shiver run down his skin. It was as if he had opened an invisible door, a passage between the known and the unknown. He carefully folded the sheet, placed it inside an envelope where the other letters usually appeared. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He tossed and turned in bed, listening to every creak of the old house, every breath of wind through the barely closed window. A strange anguish mingled with an almost childish anticipation. What would happen now? Would there be an answer? Or would only silence restore his boldness? The following days were a test of patience. He tried to stick to a routine, but nothing was the same. The work seemed endless. The mundane conversations of his colleagues felt distant, and even meal times became mechanical, devoid of flavor. What really mattered was the next envelope, and then finally it happened. Days later, when he returned home, he found something different on the table. It wasn't just another letter. It was a letter addressed to him by name. The shock was immediate. For years, all the mysterious mail had arrived unidentified, untraceable, always anonymous. But this time, her name was written in that same delicate, firm handwriting. His hands trembled as he held the envelope. Her heart raced so hard it felt like her entire body was pulsing with it. Her breathing became shallow and heavy, as if she were about to faint. Just seeing her name there changed everything. It was no longer a series of messages thrown out at random. It was no longer a joke of fate. Now it was clear there was someone on the other side, someone who knew exactly who he was. And this is where the audience also puts themselves in his shoes, because at some point everyone has felt the mixture of fear and anticipation when faced with an unexpected revelation. A message received from someone we never imagined, a phone call that changes the routine, a detail that transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. It took him minutes to work up the courage to open the envelope. Each second felt like an eternity. The paper felt heavy in his hands, as if it were made of lead. Finally, he took a deep breath, broke the seal, and removed the sheet of paper. There, between the lines written with the same care as always, was the confirmation of something greater. The letter not only acknowledged his response, it also demonstrated that the sender had expected exactly that. And that night, as he reread those words, he realized that he was no longer alone in the mystery. Now he was not just a passive recipient of ownerless letters. Now he was part of the dialogue. A link had been created, and deep down he knew life would never be the same again. My heart raced as I opened it. Each beat sounded like a drum inside his chest, echoing through the silence of the room. His hands were shaking so badly they nearly ripped the paper. For a moment he considered stopping, not reading, but curiosity, mixed with fear, got the better of him. And then, there, between the lines written in the same smooth, careful handwriting, was the revelation. The sender was someone he could never have imagined. The shock was immediate. The words before him were not those of a distant stranger, nor of a stranger who had, by chance, chosen his address. No, they belonged to someone connected to his past, someone whose existence had been erased, silenced, hidden by life's circumstances, a connection lost in time, buried for decades, a story that had never been told but now knocked on his door in the form of words. He reread it once, twice, 3 times. Each sentence seemed to burn in his eyes. How had no one told him before? How could that secret have remained hidden for so long? At that moment, the room seemed to shrink. The old table, the worn walls, the stack of overlapping letters, everything vanished before the force of that revelation. The world stopped. There was only him, the paper in his hands, and the certainty that his life would never be the same again. It was more than a correspondence. It was a reunion with a truth that had waited a lifetime to be revealed. And this is the part where the audience also feels part of this discovery. Because who hasn't wondered if there's something in their past that's been silenced? Who hasn't thought about how many stories from their own family have been hidden? How many truths have never been spoken out loud? He found himself facing an abyss. On one side, the life he had known until then. On the other, the revelation that changed everything. The letters were not just letters. They were bridges. Bridges built from one heart to another, spanning years of silence, distance, and pain. The woman in the photograph, that mysterious figure who had so intrigued him, now had a voice. She wasn't just a face forgotten by time. She was part of his own story. And every written word showed this clearly. He felt his eyes well up. It wasn't just surprise. It was a whirlwind. Disbelief, sadness, anger, and at the same time, a strange hope. Because in the midst of all that mystery, there was also a feeling of reunion, of possibility. It was as if life had waited for just that moment to show that nothing had happened by chance. As if every letter, every word, every silence had been calculated to lead him there, and he realized destiny was in no hurry. I could wait years, decades, but in the end I always found a way to reveal what was hidden. The tears flowed, not just because of the revelation itself, but because of the weight of lost time, the emptiness of years that could have been different. If only I had known the truth sooner. And perhaps you, listening to this story, have also felt this weight. The weight of asking yourself, what if I had known sooner? What if someone had told me the truth? How many things in my life would be different? This identification is inevitable because the hidden truth hurts not only those who discover it, but everyone who has ever felt the bitter taste of silence. At that moment, he understood. There was no turning back. The door had been opened. Correspondence was no longer a distant enigma. It was a calling, and he would have to respond not just with written words, but with decisions that would shape the rest of his life. The heart was still beating fast. The hands held the paper tightly, as if they were afraid it would disappear. But within him, something new was beginning to be born, courage. Because unlike all the other times, that letter didn't just tell him something. She summoned him, and without realizing it, he was ready to take the next step. The reunion had begun, and what he was about to discover was bigger than he could ever imagine. At that moment, he understood something he would never forget. Some letters are not just pieces of paper. They are not simple words written in haste, nor messages thrown out at random. They are bridges, invisible bridges that destiny builds patiently so that distant souls recognize each other when the right time finally arrives. The silence of so many years had turned into dialogue. The words that were once just mysterious echoes gained a voice, gained a face, gained history. And in answering the call of the unknown, he didn't just find the truth he'd been waiting for. He found a piece of himself he hadn't even known was missing. It was as if each line he read opened a crack in his soul. The letters revealed more than memories. They revealed meanings, revealed paths, revealed the courage to move forward. He understood that he wasn't just a passive recipient of someone's words. He was part of that story. And without realizing it, by writing his answer, he had sealed an invisible pact with destiny. Life, after all, is written with invisible hands. And these hands are in no hurry, but they know what they are doing. They write in the most unlikely places, on pages we often resist opening, in chapters we think are already closed. But the truth is, there's always something to come. There's always a new passage, a hidden paragraph, a line that could change. He discovered that pain, longing, and even silence, when looked at closely, can be messengers. Messengers who come to teach us that nothing is lost, that nothing is in vain. Everything in some way leads us to where we need to be. And in that moment of revelation, sitting at the time-worn table, with the stack of letters in front of him and the last one in his hands, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that life still held surprises. Hope that destiny, after so many twists and turns and delays, could still bring unexpected encounters. Hope that every word written was not in vain, because it was leading him to the beginning of a new chapter. He didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was no longer afraid of the unknown, because now I understood that sometimes it is precisely in mystery that we find the meaning of life. And perhaps you who are listening to this story also have invisible letters waiting to be opened. Maybe they are not in paper envelopes, but in postponed conversations, in memories we avoid facing, in gestures we never had the courage to make. Maybe there is someone somewhere waiting for your answer. Maybe there is a word only you can write, a bridge only you can build. Because life always finds a way to connect us. And when we least expect it, it places before us what our hearts most needed to read.